This is the third video in our series converting a Truetone radio into a Bluetooth speaker. In this video, we will place the Bluetooth board and the amplifier board on the chassis. But let's start by looking at the Bluetooth board. In my builds, I usually don't use an amplifier board that has a built-in Bluetooth receiver. To be honest, I haven't found an all-in-one board that is low noise, has an auxiliary input, and allows me to control the volume with a panel-mounted potentiometer. I like using a generic USB Bluetooth receiver and pairing it to a standalone amplifier that best suits the build. For this particular build, I want to use a 10 watt x 2 Class D amplifier that runs off of 12 volts. The first problem is that I'm using a 12 volt amplifier and the USB Bluetooth receiver runs off of 5 volts. And the second problem that I have is that if I try to run the amplifier and the Bluetooth board off the same power supply, I'll get a ground loop that'll cause the amplifier to buzz and click. In order to eliminate these problems, I build a Bluetooth board that includes an isolated DC to DC converter. This allows me to convert my 12 volt DC power into 5 volts for the Bluetooth receiver, and it isolates the input and output so that the ground loop is eliminated. For this project, I'll be using a Murata NKE1205SC chip. In order to use this chip, I have to build a small circuit as shown here. The power source will be my 12 volt DC that powers the amplifier. The DC to DC converter is shown next. Coming out of the converter, we use an inductor and capacitor to filter out any noise. In this case, we place the inductor between the DC-DC chip and the load, which is the USB Bluetooth receiver. There's also a capacitor between the positive and negative output leads of the DC to DC converter. Let's have a look at the build. Here I've gone ahead and soldered a USB connector onto a protoboard. We'll be building our Bluetooth adapter on this board. So what I'll do right now is go ahead and mark the positive and negative rails of the USB adapter. This is the DC to DC isolated converter, and we'll place that on the board. We'll go ahead and solder it in now. It's important when you're doing this type of work that you use a fine tip soldering iron. Here I've just tacked the IC chip in, and now I'm going to solder all the connections together. Next, I've gone ahead and placed an inductor between the positive output lead of the DC to DC converter and soldered the other end of the inductor onto the positive rail of the USB connector. Now we'll go ahead and put the negative power supply, or negative output supply, of the DC to DC converter chip to the negative rail of the USB connector. Next, a capacitor is placed between the positive and negative rails of the USB connector. Everything's soldered in and the output section is finished. Now to complete the board, we'll go ahead and solder in the DC input leads. And there you go. Use a little piece of masking tape to insulate the Bluetooth board from the contacts on the proto board. Now it's time to do a DC voltage test. Here we have the board hooked up and we're going to be looking at the voltage across the USB rails, and you can see we have 5 volts. Now we'll go ahead and insert a Bluetooth receiver and make sure everything's working. We turn on the power. And you can see the searchlight is coming on. The phone recognizes the device and it pairs, and then the searchlight slows down to the paired light. We'll go ahead and turn off the Bluetooth. You can see that the searchlight's back on. And once we pair it, the paired light comes back on. Okay, let's go ahead and set this up on the chassis and see what the amplifier and the Bluetooth board look like when they are placed.
Okay, we're going to do a short test here of the amplifier and Bluetooth module that I've mounted onto the chassis. Here we have a 10 watt by 2 amplifier, audio amplifier, and here is the Bluetooth module with the isolation DC to DC converter. This is taking the 12 volts that we're putting in for the amplifier. The 12 volts is taking it down to 5 volts. And it isolates the ground from the main ground, which eliminates the ground loop that you often get in a Bluetooth module. So here we have the Bluetooth module here. Out of the Bluetooth module is this cable, which is going to our auxiliary input. All right, this jack here is a switch jack. So normally we'll have the audio passing from the Bluetooth module through the jack and then into the amplifier. However, if we plug in an external device, it'll disconnect the Bluetooth from the circuit. So we'll have the auxiliary signal coming in directly to the amplifier. All right, and that'll get mounted down here, and we'll show you that in a little bit here. So I just want to give this a test to make sure everything's working. I like to go through and test as we go through different phases of the build to make sure that everything's working. So I just have this hooked up to our lab power supply, feeding 12 volts into the amplifier and into the DC to DC converter chip. I only have one channel of the output hooked up because I only have one speaker here in the shop. So this is going to the shop speaker, and have my iPhone here, and I've got some royalty-free music like I usually use. So let's go ahead and turn it on and see what happens here.
Enter Bluetooth. Connecting.
You can see I have the volume muted. We're not getting any buzzing, any ground loop noise from the circuit at all. This DC to DC converter eliminates the ground loop. So right now I'm just controlling the volume from the phone. This amplifier has a volume control on it. So what I'll eventually end up doing is, when I have this set up and I have the speakers that we're going to use for this Bluetooth player, I'll adjust this so when I have the phone has a maximum volume, I'll adjust this so that I'm not getting any overdrive in the speakers. So this will be like a master volume switch. And you know, you'll be able to play with this if you're reaching behind and do it, but it's not going to be normally accessible, or you won't normally need to have it accessible. Alright, so that seems to be working fine. The next thing that we're going to do is I'm going to put in a I'm going to tap into here. So from the auxiliary into here, I'm going to tap into here and put a volume knob. So the volume knob will sit out here in the front of the speaker, or of the Bluetooth player, just where the original on-off and volume knob was originally. So we'll splice that into this cable here, and I'll show you that as we go along. Alright, well, thanks for watching, and we'll see you on the next video.